was right in the wake of Secretariat's Triple Crown. And all of a sudden, this filly comes along. She was just a freak. She was unbelievably fast.
She was regal looking. She just looked like a queen when she went on the racetrack, like she owned it, and she knew her business, and she was going to do it well.
She had a kind of glamour about her. When she was like a post-parade, she seemed almost haughty.
She was like, say, Marilyn Monroe walking the place. Raquel Welch.
She just stood out. I mean, in looks, in temperament, in her attitude. There was nothing ordinary about that horse at all.
She was just monstrous and as game an athlete as you possibly could ever expect. A creature, something beyond Pegasus.
Owned by Stuart and Barbara Janney, Ruffian was one of 6 yearlings to arrive at trainer Frank Whiteley's South Carolina farm in the fall of 1973.
She was broken at Claiborne Farm, and she sat here to me in October. She looked like she'd been hidden for a couple years. It looked like she was a 3-year-old instead of a yearling.
She was royally bred. She was out of a great mare named Shenanigans, who was by a native dancer, one of the great producers in the history of the turf. And she was by a reviewer who was a son of Boulder, who could flat run. And it was a match of aristocracy.
We just went by their breedings. She was a Shenanigans filly. We sort of knew around the barn that she was going to be a special filly.
When she was a 2-year-old, I was galloping her one day and I came back from the main track. Robin Smith, who was one of the first women jockeys in this country, she said, "He's gorgeous. Who is he?" And I said, "She is called Ruffian."
Whiteley kept Ruffian's talent under wraps until her maiden race in 1974 at Belmont. It was the only time she was not the favorite.
Very few people knew about her, and Woody Stevens had a good filly in that race, and so his filly was the favorite.
I said to Woody, I said, "Woody, you see that filly's big backside?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, that's all you're going to see through the stretch."
She won by 15 lengths. She equaled the track record.
Down the backstretch, Ruffian along the rail now goes head-and-head with Hot and Nasty for the lead.
Hot and Nasty was also undefeated going into the sorority at Monmouth. And for 1/8 of a mile, they had this incredible duel.
It's a 2-horse race as they pass the quarter pole. Ruffian on the inside, Hot and Nasty on the outside, going stride for stride.
I had to hit a couple times, but she drove away from the other horse very easy.
She had such great natural speed. Her races were mainly parades. I mean, you know, she'd go out and say, "Catch me if you can," and nobody could.
In the spin-away, she made mincemeat of everybody. She went to the lead like that black bullet that she is, made an easy lead and coasted home in blazingly fast time.
Ruffian in front by 3.5 lengths. Going easily in front. A magnificent performance.
In the stands that day was the trainer Lucien Lauren, who the year before had led Secretariat to his Triple Crown. Lauren was widely quoted after watching Ruffian spin away as saying, "As God is my judge, she might even be better than Secretariat."
After being named 2-year-old filly of the year in 1974, Ruffian didn't miss a beat as she entered her 3-year-old campaign.
It's Ruffian in front and going easily.
Ruffian captured the filly Triple Crown in 1975, going off in each race at odds of no worse than 1 to 10. Her performance in the final leg, the 1.5-mile Coaching Club American Oaks, awakened racing fans.
Nobody thought she'd ever go that far. She wasn't even hit with a whip.
When a filly would run up to her and try their best to get on even terms, and then she would just kind of spit in their eye and pull away, she'd break their heart.
Ruffian was out of female competition, winning all 10 of her starts.
The long-range plan was, after the spring season, to give her a rest and then race her against colts and older horses. But those plans got waylaid once people got a hold of the idea of the match race.
The undefeated Ruffian held the statistical edge over 1975 Kentucky Derby winner Foolish Pleasure, who had won 11 of 14 starts with second-place finishes in the Preakness and Belmont.
He was not the brilliant kind of horse that Ruffian was. He was kind of a blue-collar kind of guy, but he got the job done.
Here we happen to have an extremely gifted 3-year-old named Foolish Pleasure. He looked like a sprinter, very fast horse, very muscular, real athlete. And this extremely gifted filly who had just won the Filly Triple Crown.
It was a natural for them to meet, you know, to see who was supreme, because she hadn't been tested against the colts.
Match races have provided American racing with some of its finest moments.
Match races started because at the beginning they were almost the only kind of racing there was. One rich man said, "I'll race my horse against your horse."
And the greatest one is between Alsab and Whirlaway at Narragansett Park. In 1942, people came on trains from as far away as Philadelphia to Rhode Island just to see the race that day. There was that much of a difference between them at the finish line.
The Nashua Victory War Swaps was the most exciting sports event I ever saw, even bigger than Mazeroski's home run.
Two great horses in a match race will come out without strategy, but just with speed to burn, busting, burning to beat each other.
It's, in a sense, like two great prize fighters getting into the ring, and it's just the two of them to decide which one is best.
Belmont considered a race between Ruffian, Foolish Pleasure, and Preakness winner Master Derby.
The Foolish Pleasure camp decided they didn't want a 3-horse race with those particular 3 horses. They was guaranteed $50,000 to the last place horse, so they had agreed to buy us out of the race.
It was the first time I can ever recall that a horse got that much money for not starting in a race.
They thought it would be a wonderful thing for racing. That's the usual excuse they give when they're doing something commercial.
With Master Derby now out of the way, a head-to-head match race was imminent, even if Ruffian's camp had reservations.
Frank Whiteley and a lot of people in racing don't like the idea of match races to begin with, because for good horses to go all out for 1.25 miles is exhausting.
They kept upping the ante, and Mr. Johnny said, "Frank, we're going to have to do this sooner or later."
Thus, the stage was set for an equestrian version of the major battle of the times.
The theme that the marketing people hit on for this match race, which is, you know, boy versus girl.
This was not long after the Billie Jean King, Bobby Riggs match, so, I mean, there was a lot of fun to it as well.
The feminist movement was demanding that women be pitted against men.
If you were looking for Mrs. Superman, there she was on 4 legs. And with all this stuff going on about feminism, there's our hero.
There is less difference between female horses and male horses, athletically, than there is between a man and a woman.
She ran with the kind of fire that we assume to be a male characteristic.
After she won the Mother Goose, I can remember a very sensible, otherwise sensible horseman, after the race was over, saying, "She got to be a dyke."
Dick Young said that the women are beginning to regard this race as a get-even race. They're going to try to get even with us for all the wrongs we done by having the filly beat the colt.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Great Match Race. This is an historic event. Oh, there have been other match races before, as you know. There have even been match races between fillies and colts before. But seldom in modern times has a situation presented itself that does here this afternoon.
On July 6th, 50,000 rolled through the turnstiles at Belmont Park, and 18 million watched on television as Ruffian and Foolish Pleasure took center stage.
It was not a racing crowd, it was a celebrity-seeking crowd.
There was a tremendous buildup of people wore buttons all over the place.
And there were pins that said, "I'm for Foolish Pleasure," and the men would wear them, and the women would wear the Ruffian things.
I picked Foolish Pleasure just because he's a male.
Ruffian because she's a female.
I like Foolish Pleasure because I'm a male chauvinist pig.
Believe me, the debate was hot. Everybody on the racetrack was fiercely divided, and you either were for her or against her.
It was a big commotion on people watching this, you know, a filly and a colt compete like that.
If you looked at the paddock that day, most people knew each other, and that was really a gathering that day of racing nationally.
One jockey was riding both horses, and that was Jacinto Vasquez. And when it came down to choosing he chose to give up a Kentucky Derby winner to get on the filly for the match race.
I thought Ruffian had a better future than Foolish Pleasure in the long run.
And the filly we are standing in front is the brilliant Ruffian. It has been breeded around that if there's an Achilles heel, it might be her nerves or her weakness in that area. But as I looked at her before and look at her now, she seems very pacific.
Frank Whiteley said he wasn't going to get there 5 seconds ahead of Foolish Pleasure and have his horse have to wait for the colt. So everything that he could control, he had seen to, he had taken care of.
I can remember so many times in the time leading up to the race when my father would be on the phone with Frank Whiteley and he would repeat the same thing, and that was, Frank, if you think there's anything wrong with this filly, it doesn't matter all these preparations or whatever, we're not running.
One of my assistants examined Ruffian and Foolish Pleasure. They were examined, they were passed, they were sound, racing sound.
The atmosphere was eerie right before the race. There was a dark mass of thunderclouds. I mean, it got almost pitch black.
I can remember climbing the steps from the paddock area to where we were going to sit and feeling that the weight of the world was on us, being very nervous.
Those horses are in the gate, we're ready to go, and they're off.
Ruffian kind of hit the side of the gate, the left side of the gate as she came out, and straightened herself out. Then they went running.
She was doing what we'd expected her to do, which was to go to the lead.
Now Ruffian moves up, and Ruffian has taken about a head lead, but Foolish Pleasure is right there with her.
I had the backing of Ruffian right against the Foolish Pleasure shoulder. I was running him by 3/4 of a length in front of him.
Some change. Now we're coming up to the first quarter of a mile, and it'll tell about this pace. It is Foolish Pleasure going by set. Ruffian has broken down. Ruffian has broken down on the backstretch. This race is over.
When she broke her leg, you can hear like you breaking a piece of stick, like this.
I just do remember that moment of knowing something horrible had happened, but almost refusing to believe that it had happened.
She had never been passed on the racetrack, and she kept fighting Jacinto to run, and she won for a while.
She kept running after the injury and just drove this nub into the ground.
Until the bone was exposed and she was running on a bare bone, and her hoof was actually just hanging attached by some tendons and some skin.
I'm looking across, and Vasquez has dismounted from the horse. Vasquez on the backstretch is now beginning to take the saddle off of Ruffian, and let's certainly hope this is not a serious injury.
She keep walking in one leg. I'm trying to hold him up. I keep my shoulder against her just to give him some support to keep her walking.
And meanwhile, in this absolute eerie silence, Foolish Pleasure had no choice but to finish the race on his own.